Breaking news: while Israel strikes the city of Khan Younis in Gaza's south, the United Nations has issued a dire warning of a catastrophic situation. The UN issued a dire warning of a hellish scenario in which Palestinians would have nowhere to seek refuge from the ongoing fighting as Israeli forces shelled neighborhoods surrounding Khan Younis, the southernmost city in Gaza, on Tuesday. Many of the 2.2 million civilians in Gaza have been forced to seek refuge in UN shelters in the south, as they were ordered to leave the northern part of the small coastal strip by Israel. Overcrowding in these shelters has become a major health concern. Israeli officials announced that they would be escalating their evacuation efforts to focus on certain neighborhoods in Khan Younis in response to U.S. demands that they reduce casualties among civilians. However, a high-ranking Israeli official cautioned, "We did not initiate this conflict. We deeply regret the loss of innocent lives, but in the face of evil, it is necessary to take action." A few miles north of central Khan Younis, satellite photos revealed a convoy of approximately 150 Israeli tanks, APCs, and other vehicles. Some 240 people were taken hostage and 1,200 Jewish civilians were massacred in an attack on October 7. Israeli officials have blamed Hamas's political and military leaders in Gaza for the attack, and they are believed to be among those fleeing north. Following the breakdown of the 7-day truce that had freed over 100 hostages held by Palestinian terror groups like Hamas, some observers believe that Israel is in a hurry to finish the offensive before the U.S. pressure becomes too great to call for another ceasefire. Israel claims that Hamas is endangering innocent people by launching attacks from densely populated areas, particularly through tunnels that can only be destroyed by using heavy bombs. According to U.S. officials cited by the Wall Street Journal, Israeli forces have reportedly assembled a system of pumps that could be utilized to inundate Hamas tunnels with seawater. The death toll in Gaza has risen to over 15,500, with 700 more Palestinians killed since Friday, according to UN officials. "Nowhere is safe in Gaza and there is nowhere left to go," noted Lynn Hastings, the UN's humanitarian coordinator for the occupied Palestinian territory. "The circumstances necessary to provide aid to the Gazan people are non-existent. Humanitarian operations might be unable to react to an even more horrific scenario that is about to unfold," she warned. "What we witness today are overcrowded shelters, a healthcare system in disarray, inadequate sanitation, and inadequate nutrition for individuals who are already emotionally and physically drained, a recipe for epidemics and a public health catastrophe." Reporting from London, Robert Jenrick, the Minister of the Home Office, stated, "We have had a number of frank conversations with Israel, at every level, in which we have encouraged them to pursue this vital war in a responsible manner." In an interview with the Today program on BBC Radio 4, he stated that the UK government is collaborating with humanitarian groups to get as much aid and medicines into Gaza as possible. In accordance with international law, however, the minister emphasized that the United Kingdom fully supports Israel's offensive. "Everyone, Gaza residents, Israelis, and the rest of the globe, will benefit from Hamas's demise." On Sunday, the Israeli military expanded its evacuation orders to include more neighborhoods surrounding Khan Younis, the second-largest city in Gaza. This move came as the Israeli offensive moved to the southern half of the territory, where the Israelis believe numerous Hamas leaders are hiding. Overnight and into Sunday, areas in the north that had been targeted by Israel's intense air and ground campaign, including the vicinity of Khan Younis and the southern city of Rafah, were said to have experienced heavy bombardments. After Israeli forces ordered civilians to evacuate the north in the early days of the 2-month-old war, many of the 2.3 million people living in the territory are now crowded in the south. Overnight and into Sunday, areas in the north that had been targeted by Israel's intense air and ground campaign, including the vicinity of Khan Younis and the southern city of Rafah, were said to have experienced heavy bombardments after Israeli forces ordered civilians to evacuate the north in the early days of the 2-month-old war. Many of the 2.3 million people living in the territory are now crowded in the south. As hostilities resumed, prospects for the negotiation of a new temporary truce diminished. Dozens of Israeli and foreign hostages held in Gaza as well as Palestinians jailed by Israel were freed thanks to a week-long ceasefire that ended on Friday. "Achieving the war's objectives requires a ground operation, and we will keep fighting until we do," Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated in a Saturday night speech. the Israeli military issued a broader evacuation order on Sunday, requesting that residents of at least 5 additional areas and neighborhoods depart from Khan Younis for their own safety. The Israeli military allegedly dropped leaflets ordering locals to evacuate to Rafah or a southwest coastal area, according to residents. The city of Khan Younis is a hazardous combat zone, the flyers warned, according to a report released by UN monitors prior to the most recent evacuation orders. The areas that residents were instructed to leave constitute approximately 25% of Gaza's territory. According to the report, approximately 800,000 people lived in these regions prior to the war. The United States, Israel's most trusted ally, had cautioned the Jewish state to prevent large-scale population displacement just before hostilities resumed. According to the Israeli military, 5 Hamas fighters were killed by a drone overnight, and fighter jets and helicopters struck terror targets in the Gaza Strip, including terror tunnel shafts, command centers, and weapon storage facilities on Sunday. On Sunday, rescuers in northern Gaza rushed frantically, armed with limited supplies, to scour the Jabalia refugee camp and other areas of Gaza City for survivors or bodies among the debris. A female refugee named Amal Radwan told the press that they strike everywhere when asked about the urban camp Jabalia. All around us, there is the constant rumble of explosions. Another resident of Gaza City's Sheikh Radwan neighborhood, Mohammed Abu Abed, confirmed that his area and the surrounding areas were subject to constant artillery shelling and airstrikes. "This situation is imaginable," he stated. "Death is all around us. A person's life can end suddenly." The total number of casualties in the Strip since the war began on October 7 has surpassed 15,200, according to Saturday's announcement by the Health Ministry in Gaza, which is ruled by Hamas. This is a significant increase from the previous figure of over 13,300 on November 20. According to the ministry, 70% of the casualties were children and women, but it does not distinguish between civilian and combatant deaths. According to it, over 40,000 people have been injured since the conflict started. A major offensive in the early weeks of the conflict leveled northern Gaza, prompting the United States to call for protection of civilians. Southern Gaza is home to the majority of Gaza's population. Residents of Gaza have no choice but to move around within the territory to evade the bombings. The land itself is sealed, bordering Israel and Egypt to the south. The loss of life among the Palestinian people is unacceptable. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris told reporters Saturday during the COP28 climate conference in Dubai, "The scale of civilian suffering and the images and videos coming from Gaza are devastating." According to Mark Regev, a senior advisor to Netanyahu, Israel is exerting maximum effort to safeguard civilians. The military has issued leaflets, made phone calls, and broadcasted on radio and television to urge Gazans to evacuate certain areas. Furthermore, he mentioned that Israel is contemplating establishing a security buffer zone to prevent Gazans from walking directly to the border fence. Israel claims it goes after Hamas members and militants, accusing them of targeting residential areas and blaming them for civilian deaths. It asserts, without proving it, that it has eliminated thousands of militants. Israeli forces have reported casualties in the northern Gaza offensive, with at least 78 soldiers among them, according to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. A 6-story building in the urban refugee camp of Jabalia on the northern edge of Gaza City and a block of approximately 50 residential buildings in the Shijaya neighborhood of Gaza City were both leveled by bombs on Saturday. The monitors reported that over 300 individuals were buried beneath the rubble and over 60 were killed in the Shijaya strikes, citing the Palestinian Red Crescent, confirming the Red Crescent's estimate of approximately 300 missing persons. Mahmoud Bassel, a spokesman for Gaza's civil defense, stated that rescuers do not have the necessary equipment, such as bulldozers, to reach the individuals buried beneath the debris. According to him, more than 1,000 people had lived in the building. In video comments from the scene of the attack, he said, "Retrieving the martyrs is extremely difficult." The United States would not tolerate, according to a U.S. summary, the forcible displacement of Palestinians from the West Bank or Gaza, the continuation of the siege on the Gaza Strip, or the redefinition of its borders, as Harris reportedly informed Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi during a meeting. The violence began on October 7 when militants, including Hamas, attacked southern Israel. killing over 1,200 people, the majority of whom were civilians. Captured were approximately 240 individuals, while 105 hostages were released during the recent truce. The Israeli military claims that 137 are still being held captive, and their concerns have been amplified by the resumption of hostilities. During the truce, 240 Palestinians were freed by Israel. Women and children made up the majority of those who were released by both sides.